Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to Adrian's Digital Basement 2. It's like Adrian Black in the basement at night. And it is at night, it's kind of late. I have some of the lights off, to kind of bring the mood down to a certain amount. I just have the workbench light on here. And what we're going to be looking at today are a couple Mac motherboards. These two motherboards were recently given to me and, well, they're in a sad state of affairs. So what you can kind of see what's going on here is this one here is a Mac 128, but yeah. And unfortunately, I don't have the computers that these were inside of because I think the condition of the motherboard is much better than the condition of the entire computer. The whole computer, well, both computers from what I was told were incredibly rough shape and, well, really, really sad. So the motherboards were taken out of both of them before I even saw them, and they were handed off to me. But we're dealing with, unfortunately, a really early Mac motherboard here at the 128. But this corrosion is not so great. Now, the rest of the motherboard, though, does look okay. Not too bad, at least on this one. Of course, the star of the show and the kind of interesting thing we're looking at is a Maximilian memory upgrade with a serial number of 1997. So Sophisticated Circuits Incorporated, made in the USA, 1986. And what this is a RAM upgrade that is sort of, well, connected up to the board in a very interesting way to expand the RAM on this old Macintosh that did not have expandable memory. Now, I haven't really looked at these machines. I want to at least see if they work at all, these motherboards that is. I don't know anything about this RAM upgrade, so that'll be kind of interesting. I think they should come off, maybe. And from what I can tell, from a capacity standpoint, I think this is 1.5 megabytes of RAM on this card. And then the 128K motherboard here would have been upgraded to 512K from the original 128, which was a pretty simple upgrade. I mean, well, you had to desolder all the original RAM chips, and well, there's a bit of corrosion on the bottom, but the rework that was done here was really nice, really good quality stuff. I don't see any particular issues here. I think with enough scrubbing, this stuff will come off, but you could kind of see the corrosion over on the edge here. That was the bottom of the computer, the chassis is rusting away. Same on this side over here. But this motherboard is in pretty good shape otherwise, looking pretty good. Now, the other motherboard is, well, it's in pretty rough shape, but in different ways. If we flip this around, we can see here that this is a 512K motherboard, and look at the corrosion there. So the ports are in, I'm going to say better shape. They're still poor, but they're a lot better than the other one. But the rest of the board is rough. This stuff here, this motherboard may actually work the way it is now, or maybe it would just need to have new sockets installed for the two ROM sockets, but the rest of this might actually work. Now, if you can believe it, I've already washed and cleaned this motherboard. So this white stuff you see on here, this isn't something that comes off easily. Like, I can't just wipe it off with my finger. That is definitely some type of like mineral deposits from hard water and water continually flowing over the motherboard for a long period of time. So it's pretty rough. Got a bodge wire there. Does the other one have that as well? Yes, it does. This must have something to do with the RAM expansion. Now, this one also has all of the corrosion and stuff going on there as well. So it's pretty rough. The RAM expansion card, which has a serial number of 2104, so a little bit later than the other one, is in okay shape. Now, did you notice the other one here is missing a chip? That's funny. I wonder what happened to that. Maybe it fell out when someone was taking these boards out of the computers. Taking these out of Macintoshes, if you've ever worked on a Mac 512 or Plus, when you have these add-on boards attached to the motherboard, you can't slide the motherboard out of the chassis anymore. Normally you loosen the screws, take the cover off, and then you slide the motherboard out. The ports go out of the chassis. Problem is, there's not a lot of clearance. So if you have boards like this, you cannot slide them out that way. You actually have to use a screwdriver to kind of bend the metal chassis to free the board. Now, on Mac SEs, which came after, Apple fixed that by actually notching the motherboard on one side, and allows you to slide the motherboard a little bit. Well, the ports would go out a little bit, and then you can tilt the motherboard out. And that allows it to be removable when you have these boards on it. But with these types of systems, it's not as easy. Now I was thinking that between these two motherboards, I should be able to make hopefully one of them work. And I was sort of thinking that if this motherboard works, this is the 128, then maybe I can take these ports off and then I can steal the ports off this motherboard and transfer them onto this one. It's my recollection that the ROMs that Apple use, these mask ROMs, are sort of non-standard pinout. So I can't just install EPROMs into the board here, but maybe with some adapters that would be possible, because this is not looking good right here. This chip is probably no good along with that one. Now I do have a spare Mac 512K motherboard, a good, really nice condition one, so I can at least borrow the ROMs off that one, and I know they're good because that board totally works. And I can put it onto these and see if these work, if the ROMs are the problem. In a way, we're sort of lucky that there aren't a lot of socketed chips. Well, obviously the RAM is all socketed, but if we take the RAM expansion board off here, nothing else is really socketed on here except for the EPROMs. So it might just be a matter of changing out these two sockets, and then we'll have a working system. As for getting this RAM board working, well, who knows? There's a lot of chips here that might be bad, not to mention there's the interconnects and whatnot that connect these two boards together, and that might be a problem as well. But there's no point to really get ahead of myself before we test these things, because you know what? Both may work. So for testing these, I'm going to use my good old adapter here from PicoRC. These are open source power adapters that let you use ATX power supplies with older vintage hardware. And the gist is, instead of using like a large ATX power supply like this, you could use a Pico ATX power supply, which is really small, plug it into this board, and then it allows you to replace the whole power supply inside your vintage computer. I'll put a link in the description to the GitHub repo and the Tindy store where you can pick these up if you don't want to assemble one yourself. But the really nice thing about these is, for this one, it allows me to run the system outside of a case. So I don't even need the rest of the Mac to test these out. And even though the bag said Mac Plus, of course, this works on the 512, the 128, and the Mac Plus. So as you can see here, this connects up to the motherboard, and then we plug in an ATX power supply into this. And then I've gone ahead and I've already added on this, well, this was like a port connector from a PC or something, but this allows me to plug my RGB to HDMI into the Mac so we get video output. And then this is the power switch for the ATX power supply. The real way to use this actually is you put the motherboard back into the Mac chassis, you plug this into the motherboard, put a Pico ATX power supply on there, it sort of sticks up through the metal chassis. And then the way it works is this will backfeed power through this connector here back into the CRT board and pass the video signal, the audio, and also power to the CRT board. So it runs the CRT and the audio amplifier, and therefore you don't even have to worry about the entire switch mode power supply section on the analog board working at all. You would use a 12-volt DC barrel jack instead to power up your system, and you would not be using the 120 volt / 240 volt switch mode power supply. I'm on a tangent there. I just wanted to talk about how cool this project is, and it really makes testing for me really easy. Well, between these two, I think we should start with the Mac 128 board, because this seems less corroded than the 512. We have power supply connected, RGB to HDMI is connected. With the RGB HDMI set up for the Mac profile, the reason why we're seeing a white screen right now is because for the Mac 128 through Plus, the video output is actually inverted. And that just means the default state of the RGB to HDMI is going to be a full white screen. Now, I sort of expect this thing not to work at all. Now, I do still have the missing RAM chip. We'll just steal one off this one if this machine shows some kind of signs of life. Let's see what happens here. Well, we're getting something, actually. So there was a little bit of static. Wow. Okay. All right, well, let's fix this RAM chip problem, because it could well be that we're getting that black background as opposed to the gray background, simply because we have some untrustworthy RAM here. Now, I went ahead and just popped a chip in there, but I am just going to give every other chip a little bit of a push. Now, unfortunately, the sockets that are in use here are frankly terrible. So, you know, it might well be that this RAM expansion card isn't going to work very well, or is going to be too problematic. Looks like there's at least 2 sets of pins that go down onto the board. There's this, which I think is a pin header, which from what I can tell, if we flip this over, I think they've removed this RAM chip here. Yeah, I think that's a RAM chip normally. And all of those signals make their way up to this board here. I'd have to go ahead and grab my other spare motherboard just to take a look at it, to see if it is indeed a RAM chip or some other TTL logic chip. There are obviously some TTL logic chips on here. These two as well. I think these come up from the bottom. You can't really see because of the darkness, but yeah, there's pins that make their way. The sockets have long pins that go all the way down onto the motherboard there. These two chips are 244, so 8-bit buffers, probably used for addressing because RAM is multiplexed address bus. And then these two headers with these pull-up resistors are going to be the data bus that go down to the main board. We do have one custom IC on here. This is almost certainly a GAL or a PAL. It says version 1.2, copyright 1986. Of course, if these are bad, well, there's no way this RAM card could work because, you know, unless someone has the equations that go inside of there, we can't recreate that. Now, the thing is, the system did show a sign of life there when we turned it on. So let's try again. Now, I'm going to have to go look up to see. I just turned it on. Oh, that's the normal RAM test screen, which we were not getting before, and that could have well been because of that missing RAM chip. That's really good. And if it detects any bad RAM, you should get a SADMAC. It's freaking working. All right, well, what I was about to say is we need to find out if this thing has a ROM upgrade in it, because if it has the 512K EEROMs, the enhanced ROMs, it means it can work with double-sided discs. And I have another drive. I mean, I don't know, we could try plugging it into this rusty connector here, but I could plug a floppy drive in. We need to boot this thing up to see what exactly it sees for RAM. I think there should be 2 megs of RAM on this thing. It's freaking working. Unbelievable. I am always amazed when hardware has had the worst, hardest life, and then it just fires up like nothing was wrong. I do notice though that it seems to be frozen, and I was poking at this a little bit. Let's hit the reset button. Let's push the reset button. The reset button doesn't work. I pushed the interrupt button. Seems the reset button is not working. It's probably got corrosion in it or something. Who knew? Who knew? Yeah, leaving a computer out in the rain and whatever for unknown amount of time would corrode a button. All right, I just grabbed a mouse, and maybe it's not flashing because if there's no floppy drive plugged in, Mac 512s or 128 ROM is unhappy. So definitely reached our first issue. I cannot plug the mouse in, and that's because of rust jacking. So the surround on this jack here, the pins themselves are surely fine, but the surround part has basically gotten bigger because of the rust. So what I'm going to need to do, and I think this is going to be possible, is perhaps I can just remove the 2 nuts there and actually get the shroud off entirely. And if that's the case, I can just steal the shroud of this motherboard. All right, I think getting these out is going to be difficult. I'm not 100% sure how these are actually put in, and I did just sort of squish that one with the vice grips there. They are screwed in, I can see threads, but they've probably corroded in place because that does not budge at all. So that kind of has me thinking this might just be easier to just simply remove these entirely. And before we do that, I think we should try the other motherboard, because I really feel like, at least for the floppy drive connector here, I'm gonna have to steal this one. This is a very unusual jack that's not made anymore. These 9 pins, I hopefully have some in my spare parts, and this is a standard part. So if I do, I can swap those out. But this one, I'm gonna have to steal off this board. So let's just pop this chip that I stole out of that motherboard and pop it back into this one. Now, I really feel like it's impossible that this other motherboard works, simply because of the corrosion, especially around the ROM sockets. But weirder things have happened. Field found 64 and all that, right? Okay, here we go. 3, 2, 1. No, that is a dead computer right there. Completely expected, very much so. Now let's just turn this off and on. Okay, we're getting the same thing. Maybe I just need to give this a good old push and maybe take these 2 ROMs out of here. Okay, yep, no change at all. All right, who's ready for a little crunch-tasticness? So these are the 2 ROMs. I'm gonna remove them. I've drawn arrows on them. I always do this where I draw an arrow pointing away from each other, and that will just help me not mix them up. I did it on the other motherboard as well. Let's see how these come out. Oh, that's not nearly as bad. Oh, look at that, look at that. Yeah, all right, well, I don't think these sockets are gonna work, but we can try the other ROMs. We know those ROMs are good. Yeah, that is crusty-matic. All right, these are the two ROMs I took out of the other board, less corroded. Got to grab some Deoxit here, and we'll pop some of this into the socket just to give it a little lubricant. There is a lubricant in Deoxit, so it's not just a regular contact cleaner. It actually has a lubricant, and that's what I kind of like about it, is it makes getting things in and out of sockets a lot easier. All right, so these are the working ROMs that we know work. So we'll pop these in here. In fact, I feel like I should take these in and out a few times just to make sure that those have the best chance of going in properly. I think I bent a pin just now on this one. So the motherboard we're looking at here, this is the Mac 512 again. So the second one, it doesn't have the corroded ports, but it has all this hard water deposits on the board itself. So here we go, 3, 2, 1. Oh, it's actually having a sign of life. Oh, wow. So that could easily be one of the data lines, for instance, coming from the ROMs are problematic. We could have a bad RAM chip as well on here. Now, what we can tell is that the RAM is working well enough that it's able to at least display, I mean, there's some corruption there, but it's able to display something at least. If I push down on all these RAM chips, does it change anything? No. What we should do though, is I should push down on the ROM chips here really hard. See if that changes anything. It doesn't at all. So I'm thinking that we got a bad RAM chip here. That's probably what's going on. Yeah, because pushing down on stuff does nothing. Now the thing is, I mean, it'd be boring, but I'm probably gonna have to do it. I'm just gonna need to reseat every single one of these RAM chips in this board. Because each one of these has a socket, and we saw how bad the sockets were on the two ROM chips, right? So it may well be that things are not good on these RAM sockets as well. So I just did the top where I kind of gave it a push. I didn't take them out, obviously. I'm just gonna keep doing that. Sometimes if there's a little oxidation on the legs, just giving it a push actually can, you know, help get better contact or whatever. Obviously, taking them out, cleaning the legs if they're bad, putting Deoxit, putting new sockets, those are all things that can help it work a lot better. Same thing. Now with the Macintosh, the memory map is such that you have 4 megabytes of memory. It's down at the bottom of memory space. It starts at 0, goes up from there. And on the Mac, the way the video works, yeah, no change, is it draws the video you're looking at in the top part of memory. So you can like go look up the memory map for the classic Macintoshes, and no matter how much RAM you have in your Mac, say you have 128K, it puts the bitmap display of what you're looking at there that's drawn to screen at the very top of memory space. So if you have more RAM like 512, it moves it up to the top of 512, 1 megabyte, 2 megabytes, and so on. It seems that Apple, when they designed the ROMs, did it in such a way that it was smart enough to know that adding additional RAM, if it found the RAM at boot up to 4 megabytes, it would utilize it and then move the bitmap display up to the top of that memory. And that's obviously what's happening here. Now we saw on this other Mac when we booted it up with the missing RAM chip, it tried to draw, it was able to draw the unhappy Mac, but it didn't have the background like the gray image, and it wasn't doing the RAM test lines either. And I think that's all part of the fact that like part of the memory up at the top wasn't quite working. Like it was kind of working, but one of the bits was missing, or it was like high all the time or low all the time. Now with this particular system, I can feel there's a little bit of warmth to the chips. I'm just looking for anything that's kind of out of the ordinary. I'm just gonna move this around and like watch, see if we can see anything change. So far, nothing is changing at all. Let's reset the computer. Oh, now it's not booting at all. I might not have given it enough time to rest. Yeah, okay, we have, I have successfully broken the system entirely. It no longer works. So let's try that again. All right, we're back to that. So it goes right to that same sad Mac every single time. It could well be bad ROM sockets, because the ROM code itself is what's running the diagnostics, right? And it's also loading that sad Mac icon or whatever from its ROM space. So say there's something not working in the ROM, although you would think it wouldn't even be able to draw that at all if the ROMs weren't working. Yeah, it's gotta be bad RAM. It's really gotta be bad RAM. I suppose the next thing I should do is just try to take this expansion board off. So if I push on it, kind of works. I mean, works as well as it does. Yeah, now it's working. Let's see if I can get this board off. It's got little flatheads here. Oh, that are totally rusted in there. Let's see if this can actually come free. Oh, look at that. Whoa. Screwdriver down. Not a fan of flatheads for the exact reason there. It just sort of fell out. Oh, you know what? The threads are not rusty, just the heads. Cool. All right, so I don't know how these pull apart, if they do at all. Oh, they do. Sweet. And this here? Maybe? Yes, it works. All right, we get to see underneath this thing. Oh boy, there are wires galore under here. Check that out. And it's so dirty and messy under here. I washed this board as well. All right, so there's a connector on here that had all those wires going to it, and that does come off. So I can slide that off. I'm just doing that now. There it is. Okay, so there is the bottom of the Sophisticated Circuits 1985-86. What's it called? Maximilian. Maximilian. Love it. It looks rough. You can see the pins there. That one looks a little bent, and I don't know, maybe I just did that, so we'll just fix that real quick. I don't know if I have any of these super extended length sockets either, so I have to be careful with those. On the bottom of the board, though, it was one of the logic chips that got moved onto the main board. And what this is a 74AS253. And the thing is, I don't see that chip on the board here. So my assumption is that this chip here is actually taking the place of that. On this board, if we look carefully, we have a 139. This is like a resistor, pull-up resistor or something like that. That's our PAL chip. These are all DRAMs here. Of course, we have two of the 244s, all DRAMs, all DRAMs. Yep. So this row right here is 512K. This is 512K, 16. Okay, yes. We have exactly 1.5 megabytes on this board. And notice this Sanyo chip. Maybe I should swap that one out. Obviously, we've had a failure, and someone actually was able to figure out which was the bad chip. They must have taken each chip out one by one. I don't know. Anyhow, 1.5 megabytes, and then underneath here, and remember, this is the 512K board. And yes, these are 256K chips. So I'm thinking on this board, because I don't really see any mods, to revert this back to stock, all I would need to do is put resistor packs back in here. These are the pull-up resistors that got moved to this board so that the data bus could be picked up on the top board. And then we'd have to replace this IC, which is gone now, to do the RAM decoding. And then we have to replace these two buffers. And then theoretically, this thing should actually work again. Now, people watching this, if you ever find one of these boards and you don't know how it connects up, I guess now you do. So just to reiterate here, so this IC, pins 2, 5, 6, and 7 are connected. You see the colors there. And then pins 14 is this purple wire, and this is a 16-pin IC, and that goes to these colors on this connector here, and there's a key there. And then this via right here is picked up. That's the red wire. That resistor pack pin there is picked up, and that's the orange wire. The yellow wire makes its way over to this via right here under the 0. This wire, which is another red wire, makes its way to a via just underneath this resistor right here. And then finally, the black wire makes its way from pin 13 on the 6522 over to this pin right here on this multi-pin connector. And then we have this final bodge wire, which is the brown wire there, and it makes its way over here to R4 on the left side. So that's the final bodge. And everything looks connected, and you can just see the poor state of this poor motherboard. Now I noticed down in the corner here, there's a 128K only jumper link there, and there's some parts here that say 512 only. And I'm noticing on the other motherboard, which I know you're not able to really see very well, but it actually has that jumper link removed, and it has those resistors installed. So this definitely has had a 512K upgrade at some point. So I think what I want to do is focus my attention on the Mac 128 that actually is working. So I'm going to put the ROMs back in that board, put the missing RAM chip back in that board, and then I'm going to desolder at least the mouse connector, and we can see if we can boot a floppy disk on this thing and see how much RAM we're dealing with. Hopefully we'll have all 2 megabytes available, but if we have less, then we know we have a RAM problem probably on this board. Although theoretically, if there's RAM that's not working, we should get a SAD Mac. But anyways, I'm going to focus on that one, and we'll put this non-working motherboard off to the side for now. Welcome back to Adrian's Digital Basement After Dark. It's past midnight. I'm still working on this motherboard. that was interesting getting these ports off. Although you can see, this is the Mac 128 motherboard. I have all new ports on it. Okay, well, by all new, I mean these three are new. This one here is stolen from the other motherboard. So this should be the working motherboard still. Hopefully I didn't damage it getting these off. Getting these off, well, that was kind of interesting. What I ended up installing for the 9 pins are just these standard run-of-the-mill ones. I don't know where I got these from. I have a giant bag full. For all I know, they came from AliExpress. These were the ones that I took off and, well, yeah, they looked really bad. But what I didn't know, getting these off, is that these were actually riveted onto the board. So besides being soldered on with the pins, these holes here were actually rivets. And I didn't realize that on the first one. I started with the mouse port, and I was trying to get it off, and I thought I just had to melt the solder, it would come off. Yeah, they were rivets, and I had to drill them out. So in the process on the mouse port, I ended up damaging these pads, and I ended up having to solder this wire onto there, just to kind of make sure that this has a little extra structural rigidity to it, since the mouse port is something that gets plugged and unplugged more frequently, and I needed to make sure there was something on there. Now, as for these two 9 pins, I didn't end up damaging the through-hole plates that are on here because I just drilled the rivet out and got the rivet out without any issue. Then I desoldered them, they came right off. So the new 9-pin connectors could actually solder in the way they're supposed to, which gives them the extra rigidity. It just sort of clips into the hole, and then you flood a bunch of solder on there. Now this one, because it was riveted originally on the other motherboard, I ended up putting these flat beveled screws on here and a couple nuts on this side to hold it all together. Now, if we look at the other motherboard, and you can see that I stole this one here, I didn't realize these were rivets. I don't know, I just thought these were somehow flooded with solder, and there was like a cylinder or something, and I was trying to melt this and get it out of the board, and yeah, I couldn't do it. And I guess after all the trauma on the other board, it ended up kind of damaging those through holes. But with a drill, you could just drill the rivet right out, and well, that's what you're left with, which frankly is kind of perfect. So after I discovered that they were riveted on, to get these out, I just simply drilled through them before desoldering any of the pins. That way this was held firmly in place. I just drilled through, got the rivets out, and that actually is pretty easy. And then I just desoldered it, and the connector came right off very easily. I've taken off countless D-sub connectors on motherboards over the years, and I just never personally run into any that are been riveted. And I'm sure people are like, oh yeah, that's like super common. But honestly, I've Amigas and who knows what else, and it's never been riveted. So yeah, it's a first for me. Anyhow, top tip, yeah, just drill those out first, and then those are pretty easy to remove. All right, so the question is this motherboard still working after me manhandling and getting those connectors off? Let's turn this on and see. Good sign, it's checking the RAM. We don't yet have a bad sad Mac there. In addition, now that this is not damaged anymore, we can actually plug the mouse in. Ooh, we have a working mouse. So the fact that the disk was not flashing is not actually a fault. I'm thinking it's maybe just unhappy that there's not a floppy drive plugged into this thing. So now that we have a good floppy drive connector on here as well, I can plug in my external floppy drive. Let's power this on. See if this does anything. Now the disk that's in here, there is a disk in there, is not a bootable disk. So it should try to boot it and then eject it. What I don't totally know is if the Mac 512 or whatever ROMs these are can actually boot an external floppy disk. Oh, it's accessing the disk. And it says it has an X, but it has not ejected the disk. And why? That's interesting. I wonder if the circuit that ejects the disk is somehow bad, or maybe there's a bad contact here. I happen to keep a paper clip around for circumstances just like this. Now this is a 2GS drive, but the button doesn't work on Macs, so I'm gonna have to manually eject it. Disk is out. So what I don't know again is if double-sided disks will work on this particular computer. This is a double-sided disk. Let's just give this a try. It's system 6 point something or other. And no. In fact, what I don't really hear is any seeking of the heads on this either. I mean, it's kind of nice that we're getting that X, but that's it. So the funny thing is, when I turn the power on, I hear the drive make kind of a noise that doesn't sound normal. Kind of makes this like a seeking sound, but it's not actually moving the heads at all. Now I actually have something that might help us here. And this is a floppy drive upgrade kit, as far as I'm aware, for a Macintosh 512. And as you can see, we have a full height Sony drive, and I have a set of ROMs as well. Now this kit with the drive and the ROMs was given to me by someone locally, and it's an actual Apple update kit, I guess, as far as I'm aware, for a Mac 512, because Apple did sell the enhanced 512 kits, which allowed 512s to go to double-sided drives. And then, of course, you got a new set of ROMs that allowed that double-sided to work. So yeah, I never actually tried this out, so this will be a first. And this drive, of course, might be broken. It was already open when I got it. And the ROMs we have here are 342.0220A and 341.0221A. And you know what? Looking at these ROMs versus these, I have a feeling these are the old ROMs. These say 1983 on them, and the ones that are on here say 1986. So I bet you these are the double-sided drive upgrades, and these might be the originals that are from the Mac that did the upgrade. And that kind of has me wondering if this drive is a single-sided drive here and they just put the old parts back in the box. And yes, this is a single-sided drive, so the drive head is there. I know it's a little hard to see because it's not really focusing, but it's back there, and on the top there's just a pad. I can see that clearly. So this is definitely a single-sided drive, and that's, well, not gonna help me. I suppose where it might help is if I want to revert a Mac back to its original single-sided ROMs here and single-sided drive. Okay, I went into my stash and I found this 800K disc here. It does say I cleaned and lubed it and it works. Of course, I don't know how long it's gonna work. Now, I wonder if this is the right cable, or I need to like switch the cable to something else. I vaguely remember reading that the cable matters, and some cables do not work with certain Macs, stuff like that. So I guess we'll find out what happens here. There's just a storage disk in there. Okay, so we're getting a flashing question mark. That is different than what we were getting when the drive is not plugged in. All right, the drive's not even spinning. So there's clearly something wrong on this motherboard with the floppy drive, yeah. Okay, so I think that must have been what was happening with the external drive, which is unplugged, by the way. Yeah, it's not even spinning. Now, is this a cable problem? Maybe. I suppose we should try using the floppy emu. I can never remember how to switch this thing between Mac and Apple II mode. Does power up. So it's in Apple II mode, so that's clearly not gonna work. All right, firmware has been updated. Oh, and I just switched back to the display and it's working. So I'm wondering if the problem with the floppy drives is maybe the 12 volts is not getting through from the power supply, or like if there's a trace on the board that's bad or something like that. But hey, is this not awesome or what? Now what, it's telling me that the disk is unreadable. What disk? I don't have anything plugged in. Okay, who knows? Oh, this is annoying. So it thinks that there's another disk, probably like the other disk drive is connected. Maybe I need to plug this in. I'm guessing on this version of Mac, if you don't have the internal floppy drive connected, it's going to continually think there's a disk in the drive, which of course it can't read. So I don't have a disk in there right now. And of course the drive's not even working, right? Because it's not getting the right voltages, I'm presuming. So I'll just stick it down there in the back. And now it's booting off the floppy emu again. And the reason why I thought to try the floppy emu is because it only needs 5 volts to work. And if it's the 12 volts that's not working, I'm pretty sure the Sony drives, like the internal drive there, is not going to be happy. So yeah, it's not prompting me anymore now that that drive is connected. I think the drive electronics are working, but what's not running is the spindle, and that's because the 12 volts seems to be missing. Okay, well here's the moment of truth. 2 megabytes. We do have 2 megs. This computer is freaking working. That is pretty amazing with the condition of this computer that it actually works. I don't know for sure if the sound is working, and that's because the headphone jack there is extremely rusty. I'm curious if this one is as bad, and it is just as bad, so that's not gonna work very well. So I may need tips. Whoever's got tips on how to, well, buy a new one of these, or maybe I can get a spare from some other junk motherboard or something, let me know, because yeah, I don't think that's gonna really work. Well, I am pretty surprised that, well, this machine it was left for dead and yet it's fully operational, and it's got this awesome 2 megabyte RAM expansion on here, and it freaking is working. Wow, what a survivor this computer is. I wish I had photos of the original machine to see like its horrible state. I was only told it was in a horrible state, but there were no pictures. I didn't get any more of a description than it was horrible, and all that was savable was the motherboard. Now I am curious if we can run system 6.08, and I'm going to select that on here. Oh, we have several disks. I'll just do disk 1. And if it's reading, oh yeah, it's reading. And it's reading both sides. It's going side 0 and side 1 on the floppy emu. So absolutely this Mac is able to handle double-sided discs. So this is the 512KE, the enhanced ROMs that are installed on this Mac 128. And because this has 1.5 megabytes on here, then 512K is on the motherboard. And this is a really pimped out Mac 128, that is for sure. And there it is, system 6.08. I'm not sure if system 7 can work on these. And that's specifically because there's no hard drive interface on this, right? There's only a floppy-based hard drive interface, which of course can be emulated from the floppy emu. It's a lot slower than SCSI. Those were originally a 20 meg hard drives, but the system, I don't think the system can boot off of those. I think you have to boot a disk first, and then it can boot the hard drive. But maybe the EEROMs can actually boot directly off the hard drive. Let's give that a try. It says startup disk saved, turn off computer. So I think we have to power cycle it one more time. I picked HD20 image. And, okay, it says hard disk emulation mode. Set startup disk, press next. Well, not quite sure. Oh, it is booting. All right. So that's a feature of the enhanced ROM, I guess. So this thing actually booted right into system 5.3 here. So we have some apps and games and stuff, so we can actually run a game or two on this thing. Oh, we got Load Runner. Why don't we try Space Invaders here? Oh, wow. This is pretty terrible. This is horrible. This can't be official, right? No way. Not this flickery mess. Is there an about Space Invaders here? All right, yeah, no, this is not an official port. I was like, this is pretty bad for an official game if this is real. Running the game Macman. This has got to be a Pac-Man clone, I'm assuming. Macman. I assume there's sound. Probably with that headphone jack, it's not going to work. Wow, arcade adapter. I wonder how that works. Click to continue. One player start. Ah, well, that's not going to work. We don't have a keyboard, do we? It is the Pac-Man clone. It's a Mac with a mouth. Well, this machine kind of blew my mind. I really didn't think that either of these were going to work, although this one is less corroded, so it was the one I thought was more likely to work, and sure enough, it just worked. All I had to do was put a RAM chip on there. That was it. The thing freaking works otherwise. That's pretty amazing. So we still do have some faults, right? Well, I also had to replace those rusted out connectors on the back. Once I figured out how to get those off, then yeah, that was pretty easy. We have non-working floppy drives as well. So I think that's gonna be somewhat of a simple issue because I'm pretty sure the floppy circuitry is working because obviously the floppy emu works perfectly, and it even tries to access the external floppy drive. When I plugged in, the light came on and everything. So the 5 volts is powering up the drive electronics and all of that is good. The issue is it doesn't seem like the 12 volts is getting through. So I just need to trace that out, and maybe there's a bad connection. I mean, it could have been even when I desoldered. No, when I took those connectors off, I was very careful and I inspected and I did not break any traces or anything. But it could be that something has been eaten away, and I do see a voltage regulator right here on the Mac that maybe is not functional or something like that. So that'll be a future video for troubleshooting. And then the other motherboard, which I have sitting over here, of course, I stole the floppy drive connector off of it because, well, you know, I don't know, this thing is in really bad shape. It would be kind of fun to try to get this thing working. I think what I'll do, though, for that, this will be in a future video at some point, is I'm going to probably remove the RAM expansion stuff and just put the missing IC back on the board here and put the pull-up resistors back on the board. And that'll be a lot easier to troubleshoot. It's just not easy to troubleshoot something that's not working when you don't know if the problem is on the motherboard or on the RAM expansion card. Maybe what I'll do is leave this cable on here And that way I can go back to having the RAM card. If I'm able to figure out that the motherboard works perfectly, but then when I put the RAM card back on, we're getting that sad Mac. So this might be a working motherboard as well. Although let's be honest, finding PCB mount DB19, I think it is, connectors, I'm not sure that those are available in any way. Although, hold on a second. Now I think about it, I think I might have one or two Mac motherboards that had batteries blow up on them. And that means I have spare floppy drive connectors. Yes, I do. Okay. So that means I can bring this one back, because I don't like to destroy or, you know, turn a motherboard into parts, condemn this motherboard when it doesn't need to be condemned. So that'll be a future repair episode to try to put back the floppy connector and then get this one working. And if I can get this working, then I'll get that RAM card plugged back in and maybe we can get this running with 2 megs of RAM again. Because how cool is that, having a 2 megabyte Mac 512 motherboard? We'll have 2 of them when they were both left for dead. And I think the person who saved these motherboards wasn't sure that these motherboards could ever work again. Of course, the whole machines were so bad off. So anyhow, that is going to be that for this video. If you enjoyed me fooling around with this stuff and checking out the Maximilian upgrade cards and stuff, thumbs up would be appreciated. But if you didn't, you know what to do. And thanks to my patrons. Their names are scrolling up the side of the screen over here. And yeah, they make it possible I do this full time. You can become a supporter. There's a link in the description below. Check out my other channel if you haven't already. Thumbs up, all that YouTube junk, subscribe, etc., etc. And this has been Adrian Black After Hours, coming to you from the basement. And I should really go to bed. It's past 1 in the morning now. So stay healthy, stay safe. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Oh, I have a little addendum to add to the end of the video here. I forgot that I have this little thing you plug into the floppy drive port on Apple machines. And this came from KMac. I got this at VCF, I think last year, VCF Chicago. And what this does is shows you the voltage rails coming out of the floppy drive port. And on the Mac, you get 12 volts, 5 volts, and negative 12 volts. I guess on the Apple II as well. And the way it would display on here is positive 12 volts, positive 5, and negative 5 or negative 12 volts, I think, negative 12. And this one's in blue and these two are in red. And if we power this thing on, aha! So we have 5 volts, minus 11.5, and no 12 volt rail. So that means that it's not a problem with my connector that I added, because it would work on the internal stuff. All the signals from this connector just make their way to this, and then they go off somewhere else on the motherboard. So there's obviously a break or a fuse or something wrong somewhere. Let's move this around. That doesn't do anything. Nope. And I know this adapter, by the way, works. I've used this on like the Mac Plus, and it definitely puts the 12 volts to the right place and the floppy drives work and stuff like that. So I'm saying that it's something with this motherboard specifically that's causing this not to work. In fact, what we can do, I just had a thought, let's pop this off and let's switch over to the other motherboard, the one that is now missing the connector, but that's, what was I thinking here? That is ridiculous. That is ridiculous. Anyhow, on this one, it should be a pretty easy problem to fix. I just have to find the schematics, and I'm sure there's just a bad trace or whatever. And I will reconnect that maybe with a bodge wire. And then we will be fully operational again with floppy drive. Since we know the rest of the floppy drive stuff is working because the floppy EMU worked perfectly, etc., etc. So the problem exists simply in the missing 12 volt rail. So that's it for my little addendum. Now it's really the end of the video. Okay, bye. Okay, we're back with another addendum here. So the 12 volt pins are over here on this connector, and they make their way over, I looked at the other motherboard, they make their way over to this capacitor. So that's the 12 volt rail. And on the power connector, they are there. So what's going on? Well, check that out. That is called not plugged in all the way. And I bet you that was the problem. If I just give that a push, we plug this in now. Like, oh, I feel so dumb. I'm glad I didn't do any like additional work there because that problem was strictly, I think, there. Let's turn this on, and I bet you we're gonna have 12 volts. No, we're not. Oh, okay. Well, that's surprising. Let's double check what we're seeing with the multimeter here. Sorry that it's not really in view that well. Okay, so if we go down to that cap, yeah, 0.7. Okay, what's going on here? Well, we got 12.2 there, and that's the pin on the top side. So what's happening? Okay, I thought I was done with this, this video, but we're still going, everyone. We're still going. So the power supply is off. Let's figure out which of the pins here is supposed to be 12 volts. Okay, so it's this pin right here. That is the 12 volt pin. And if we turn on the motherboard here, we do not have 12 volts there. We have 0.76. What's happening here? And on the top side, with the power turned on, it's the second pin towards the port. And yeah, we're getting 12.6 or 12.2 or whatever we were getting there. What's happening here exactly? Is that pin broken or something? Oh, I see the problem. I freaking see the problem. Oh, the issue is, for whatever reason, plus 12 is right there. It's labeled. It's this pin. There's nothing there. There's no pins there. The pin is just missing. This is the connector that goes down to the motherboard. I don't get it. I do not understand what's happening here. The weird thing is, I am positive that I've used this exact adapter on a Mac Plus and had working floppy drives. And of course it needs 12 volts. And looking at the pinout, that is the 12 volt signal. Now the funny thing is I can see there's a metal contact in there, but for whatever reason it's not making its way up to the top there. And that's the issue. So what I went ahead and did is I grabbed a little piece of offcut and stuck it in that hole with a bunch of flux, and then I added solder to the top. And I'm assuming it worked before because maybe it's just touching ever so slightly on the top side. I don't know for sure, but I do know now if I go from this pin, which is 12 volts, down to the capacitor here on the 12 volt rail, there is continuity and it's less than an ohm, which makes me feel like this is probably going to work, but we'll have to try a disk drive. Yep, okay, so we're getting the 12 volts now. So there was no fault on this motherboard. It was a complete fault on me. I made this adapter, I put it together, and I don't know what I did there. Why was that pin not connected? I couldn't tell you. Okay, the disk drive is connected. Let's turn this on. Let's put the disk in here. And you know what? I think I heard the drive spin, but what we can do is we can measure the voltage on that pin there. Okay. Oh, it's working. It's freaking working. It is booting the disk there. Yep. Okay. Well, that was hilarious. Sometimes it's not the motherboard or your system that you're working on that's at fault. It's something you're assuming works that you're powering the motherboard from. So lessons learned, and that's the end of the actual video for real this time. The video is over. This motherboard, as far as I can tell, is working perfectly. That is freaking awesome. Not so awesome that I messed this up, but cool about the motherboard. Okay, thanks for watching. That's it for After Dark. Bye.